Ed Cole, Managing Director, Discretionary Investments at Man GLG. Ed, one of your messages in the conversation here at the IN Alternative Symposium was that beta is problematic. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think there's probably two ways to think about that, James. The first is that we've had a environment in the last 15 years where really beta has been all you needed. We've had this environment of very low interest rates, US dominance in equity markets. And I think we have to be prepared to realize that we're in a world now where probably inflation is going to be higher and more volatile. I think history tells us that inflation is rarely just resolved quickly and in one cycle, that it tends to come back, that inflation expectations become entrenched and sticky. And inflation is very problematic for traditional assets, both equities and bonds. In particular, the problem I think for equities is that if you've had this 15-year period where one market has dominated everything so dramatically and where a large part of the return you've achieved has been through multiple expansion, you have to think about what the impact of that return profile is if inflation is higher and more volatile, because multiples generally contract during inflationary periods. So I think the first thing to think about is, if the world's changed, do the things that won in the previous regime continue to win? And I think there's a major question mark there. And the other thing which is related to that is about the correlation between bonds and equities. We've got used to stock bond correlation being negative. And that's been amazing because you've had these natural diversifiers between the world's two most liquid asset classes. So you buy bonds, you buy equities, you've actually made money over time in both, but they've offset each other beautifully. And we saw in 2022 that started to change. And we can see some of my colleagues have done terrifically good work on this, that when inflation typically crosses a threshold into a higher regime, stock bond correlation goes positive and it upsets that relationship.
Should investors feel that US dominance is set to continue, and what risks ensue from that? Concentration risk in the equity side is very real.
Yeah, I think as I said, we've all got used to US equities winning. And the other thing is not just that it's the allocation to US equities, it's that what you've ended up with within US equities is the dominance of these like long duration assets, right? So the reason that US equities have done so well, I think we have to be clear, it's the most dynamic economy in the world. It's the best economy for human innovation. And a world of low interest rates has put huge capitalization on innovation. And so the tech sector and the knowledge sectors have done incredibly well. And the multiples have got very big on those. And that's now, we can see it this year, the Magnificent Seven, right? It's become a huge part of US returns. I think your point about concentration is right. So there's a problem of too much capital in one region, and within that, too much capital chasing a certain type of security, which is a long duration security. And what we saw it in 22, is that, bond duration got destroyed, equity duration got destroyed. Mm. Those are very real problems. It may not be a problem today. I mean, we've just had a US CPI print, which was very soft. It may not be a problem for the next 6 months, but I think every one in an allocation role has to be thinking about the next 5 years. And it's the risk that inflation comes back and upsets that sort of normal expectation that those sectors and that country is going to continue to win.
And what role do you see alternatives playing in portfolios going forward? And there's a semantic aspect to this too, because I suppose it's like Coldplay in music. If you're alternative at the start, if you become mainstream, are you still alternative?
Yeah. Look, I think so. The first part of that question is, we think about, it's both the first and the second part. We think about alternatives as diversifiers, right? What you're trying to deliver is something that gets you away from the risk premium attached to those traditional betas. So if all your alt does is charges you more fees for something that you can get cheaply by buying equity beta or bond beta, it doesn't do anything at all. So the truth is it has to do something idiosyncratic, it has to do something defined, and it has to stick to that definition. It's a wide range of definitions, right? I mean, at Man Group, we do everything in liquid alts from, kind of credit to equity market neutral to alternative risk premia to trend. We do a huge range of different things, and they all have their own peculiarities and their own risk profiles and ways that they behave inside different performance environments. I think there's no single right thing to think about. The idea is rather thinking about the idea that there may be space for more of a mix of those in your portfolio than there was in the last cycle.
With rates higher, concerns of recession, consumer confidence in the developed markets, if not dampened, struggling to re-emerge, what sort of returns should investors seek in the near future? Do they have to change their expectations from the previous decade?
Yeah, I think we do. I think the numbers on this are correct, or broadly correct, that from the trough in 2009 to the peak in 2021 in US equities, the S&P ETF gave you 19% annualized. I mean, I don't know if that's the best period in history, but it's very nearly close. That's exceptional. And I again, part of that, the largest single part of that has come from multiple expansion. I don't believe we can rely on multiple expansion to drive returns. So yeah, I think return expectations have to be lower. I think we all need to be thinking much more clearly about how we can achieve real returns in excess of inflation. Inflation is obviously a movable number, but assume that if central banks were targeting 2 before, my expectation is that even though they won't tell us it, that their expectations of normal long-run inflation now are probably rising to closer to 3. And we have to be trying to achieve durable returns in excess of that number. Now, some people are going to think, well, that's easy, you just do cash, because today that's 5. The problem is, of course, that if inflation drops to, let's say, 3, and I'm talking probably more about the US here than Australia in particular, banks are going to be quick to cut their deposits, right? So over the long run, I don't think cash is going to give you a real return. And that's why, and over the long run, I don't believe equities are going to give you anything like the return they've given us in the last 15 years. And that's why we have to start thinking more creatively about risk premiums or return profiles that are not related to traditional betas and can deliver that irrespective of the market environment.
What do you and your team at Man see as the greatest potential risk to markets of all of the cocktail of possibilities in 2024?
So I think I'd probably answer that in 2 ways. I'm a broken record on this. I've been thinking we're having a hard landing for a long time, and I think there's been so much that's been unusual about this cycle in excess savings, keeping the consumer more resilient than we thought, and employment being so tight because of supply chain disruption. I still think growth is the biggest problem. Very closely adjacent to that is that, markets have been very keen to try and discount rates peaking and then cutting. I think what the Fed is telling us in particular is actually that we're in a higher for longer world. And the big risk I think we all need to be clear about is that there's refinancing for corporate debt that has to happen now. It's moving from a world of, let's call it 3% cost of debt to 7% cost of debt. That's going to be a really material stress for financial resilience in businesses and for margins as well. And I think it's something we've seen on the consumer side. I mean, more here probably than in many other places, is that you've seen that repricing of mortgages that happens very quickly, and it changes, the resilience of the consumer and the resilience of businesses.
Ed Cole, Managing Director, Discretionary Investments at Man GLG. Thank you very much, and safe travels.
Cheers.